What if the secret to, immense success isn't really about trying to be a genius, but simply trying to be consistently, well, not stupid? I mean, we spend so much energy trying to be brilliant when just avoiding obvious, predictable errors yields vastly higher returns.
Right. It forces a complete rewiring of how you approach problem solving.
Hmm.
Society basically conditions us to look for the silver bullet, the massive stroke of insight. But a historical look at highly successful individuals shows they are often just carefully playing defense against their own ignorance.
And that shift in perspective is the entire foundation of today's deep dive. We are unpacking the cognitive operating system of the late Charles T. Munger. He was the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, and frankly, one of the most rigorous thinkers of the modern era.
Oh, absolutely.
So our sources today are a collection of his speeches, his essays, and summaries, heavily centered around his famous Poor Charlie's Almanack and his masterclass, A Lesson on Elementary Worldly Wisdom.
And that title, Worldly Wisdom, is very deliberate. He isn't offering magical financial formulas or, abstract academic theory. He is offering a heavily tested, pragmatic approach to navigating reality as it actually exists, not as we wish it existed.
Yeah, so the mission for this deep dive is to cut through the massive information overload you face every single day. We are going to equip you with a curated cognitive toolkit, just shortcuts to making better decisions in your career, your relationships, and your investing.
Because to stop being stupid, you first have to realize that memorizing isolated facts simply doesn't work.
Right, if facts don't have a structure to hang on, they just slip right through your brain.
Exactly. Munger visualizes this structure as a latticework of mental models. Think about traditional education. We are taught in strict silos. You go to math class, the bell rings, you go to biology class, then psychology, then economics.
We're trained to isolate variables.
Right. But in the real world, problems do not respect academic boundaries. A business failing isn't just an economic problem. It's a psychological problem, a mathematical problem, and sometimes even a biological one. So you have to pull models from multiple disciplines and interlock them.
Let's break down the danger of ignoring that lattice work. Munger relies on the old proverb, to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. If you only view the world through a single lens, say economics, you will literally torture reality to make it fit your economic model.
You force the fit.
Yeah, it makes me think of a terrible chef who only knows how to use salt. If the soup is bland, they add salt. If the cake is dry, they add salt. If the chicken is burnt, they just cover it in salt. Eventually, everything they make is inedible because they are applying the exact same tool to completely different chemical problems.
And if that chef opened a restaurant, Munger would say they have a perfectly disastrous business model. In the sources, he illustrates this by joking about chiropractors.
Oh,
Yeah, if you go to a chiropractor, their solution to nearly every medical ailment is going to be adjusting your spine. They don't look for bacterial infections or muscular tears because their entire training, their only hammer, is spinal alignment. The subconscious mind naturally narrows the diagnosis to fit the tool at hand.
but let's be realistic here. Do you actually need to go out and get a PhD in evolutionary biology and another in behavioral psychology and a master's in statistics just to avoid making bad decisions? Because that sounds totally impossible.
No, you absolutely do not need deep, specialized expertise in everything. The human brain can't hold that anyway. Munger estimates that just 80 to 90 fundamental models will carry about 90% of the freight in making you a worldly wise person.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And of those, only a mere handful do the really heavy lifting. You just need the foundational concepts of the major disciplines. You can actually apply the rule of three models. When you face a complex problem, force yourself to evaluate it through at least 3 different disciplinary lenses.
So you combine like one psychological model, one economic model, and one mathematical model.
Exactly. You essentially triangulate the truth by seeing where the different models intersect.
But knowing the models is one thing, deploying them under pressure is another. I mean, you can't just cross your fingers and hope the right evolutionary biology model magically pops into your head during a super stressful board meeting.
You deploy them by turning the lattice work into a literal checklist. The sources draw a direct line between Munger's approach and Atul Gawande's famous research on checklists in aviation and surgery. Gawan found that highly trained, brilliant surgeons were making fatal errors not from a lack of knowledge, but from a failure of memory under extreme stress.
Right, and they introduced a basic physical piece of paper with simple steps like washing hands and confirming the patient's name, and fatality rates just plummeted.
That's amazing. The checklist halts the momentum of a cascading failure, because in high-stakes environments, human attention is incredibly fragile. The checklist serves as a defense mechanism against what the sources call the cocaine brain.
The cocaine brain. That's quite a term.
Yeah. When the prospect of making massive amounts of money or achieving a huge goal appears, it stimulates the exact same primitive reward circuits in the brain as cocaine. Dopamine floods the system, greed kicks in, and the logical prefrontal cortex basically shuts down. A physical checklist forces the rational brain back into the driver's seat.
But, I mean, a checklist assumes the person holding it is still fundamentally willing to be rational. What happens when human emotion like greed, fear, pride hijacks the brain so completely that you subconsciously refuse to even look at the checklist?
Well, even the best system can't stop you if your evolutionary hardwiring is in active rebellion. That requires shifting from pure logic to Munger's two-track analysis.
Okay, so how does that work?
Whenever you are evaluating any situation, you have to run two separate simultaneous tracks of thought. Track one is the rational calculation. You look at the raw facts, the probabilities, the objective data. Is how an engineer would calculate the load-bearing capacity of a bridge.
And track two.
Track two is the psychological assessment. You actively scan for the subconscious biases, the emotional blind spots, and the automatic tendencies that routinely derail human judgment.
Got it. And the most pervasive of those track two derailments is incentive cause bias, right?
Oh, without a doubt. If you want to persuade someone or understand why a system is failing, appeal to their interest, not their reason. There is a phenomenal case study in the sources regarding Federal Express.
Yeah, so track two is all about the subconscious. We think we are making rational choices based on the company's mission statement, but we are really just following the money.
FedEx is the ultimate proof of that. Their entire business model relied on a central hub where all packages had to be shifted from plane to plane in the middle of the night. It had to happen incredibly fast, or the planes would be delayed and the overnight delivery promise would be broken.
Right.
But management could never get the night shift to finish the job on time. They tried moral suasion, they tried threats, they rotated in new managers. The delays just continued.
Because they were paying the night shift workers by the hour, the mechanism of the failure was just baked right into the compensation.
Look at the incentive structure. If you get paid by the hour, your financial incentive is to take as long as possible to do the job. The rational track one analysis from management said, we are paying them to move packages.
Right.
But the psychological track two analysis revealed we are actually paying them to move packages slowly. Finally, someone had the insight to change the incentive mechanism. They told the night shift, we will pay you a flat rate per shift. And the moment the planes are loaded, you can all go home.
And the problem cleared up overnight. The workers' incentives were suddenly perfectly aligned with the company's goals. Fast, accurate work meant they got a full night's sleep. The workers didn't suddenly become more moral or more dedicated to FedEx. The physics of their environment just changed.
The sources bring up Xerox for a similar lesson. In their early days, Xerox developed a new, highly superior machine, but it was selling terribly compared to their older, objectively inferior machine.
Yeah, that makes no sense initially.
No. Right. But the CEO, Joe Wilson, investigated and found the flaw in the commission structure. They had accidentally set up the compensation so that salespeople made significantly more money pushing the inferior machine. The salespeople weren't malicious. Their behavior simply drifted toward the strongest financial magnet.
Never, ever think about something else when you should be thinking about incentives. That's a great rule. But money isn't the only trap. The sources highlight inconsistency avoidance tendency, which is basically the psychological term for confirmation bias. The human brain deeply resists changing its mind. Once we arrive at a conclusion, we pour concrete over it.
Yeah, the mechanism behind this is mental conservation of energy. It takes massive caloric and cognitive effort to restructure your worldview. So the brain conserves that energy by aggressively defending its current programming. Charles Darwin actually understood this biological laziness better than anyone.
Oh, really? How so?
Darwin knew his own mind would automatically try to reject any new information that contradicted his evolutionary theories.
So he created an antidote. He trained himself to instantly record any disconfirming evidence within 30 minutes of discovering it.
Exactly.
He knew that if he didn't physically write it down immediately, his cognitive immune system would kick in, rationalizing away the contradictory evidence to avoid the pain of changing his mind.
He essentially outsmarted his own biology. Another biological trap is the reciprocation tendency. We are hardwired to return favors, but more dangerously, we're hardwired to reciprocate concessions.
Right.
The psychologist Robert Cialdini conducted a zoo experiment mentioned in the sources that perfectly illustrates how easily this can be weaponized against us.
It's almost like a cognitive hack. They manufacture a fake compromise, and our evolutionary hardwiring forces us to meet them halfway without us even realizing it.
The researchers walked around a college campus and asked random strangers an absurdly large favor. They said, "Will you volunteer 2 hours a week for 2 years to counsel juvenile delinquents?"
Naturally, they received a 100% rejection rate. No college student is agreeing to that level of commitment from a total stranger.
Yeah, but then the researcher would retreat and offer a smaller request. They'd say, okay, well, would you at least be willing to chaperone a group of juvenile delinquents on a single afternoon trip to the zoo?
And the compliance rate shot up to 50%. Half the people agreed. But if they had just asked for the zoo trip first, the compliance rate would have been tiny. The sequence is the entire mechanism.
By dropping the massive 2-year request down to a single afternoon, the researcher appeared to be making a concession. The human brain subconsciously feels a heavy evolutionary obligation to reciprocate that concession.
So the internal logic dictates they compromised and asked for less, so I am obligated to compromise and say yes.
The person agrees to the zoo trip not out of genuine desire, but because their brain's automatic reciprocation algorithm was triggered by the retreat.
Which raises a massive question for anyone listening right now. If these psychological traps, incentives, confirmation bias, reciprocation, are operating entirely under the surface, does simply knowing about them offer any real protection? Does awareness equal immunity?
Unfortunately, no. Awareness alone is largely insufficient. You cannot rely on raw willpower to suppress millions of years of evolutionary wiring. The solution is system design.
Okay, system design.
You have to build environments that make bad behavior difficult and good behavior automatic. The sources use the invention of the cash register as the ultimate proof of this concept.
Right, John H. Patterson and the National Cash Register Company. Patterson owned a small retail store, and his employees were stealing him blind. He didn't pull them into the back room and give them a stern lecture on ethics. He didn't try to change their fundamental psychology or appeal to their better angels.
No, he recognized that the system itself was tempting them to steal. So he bought one of the very first crude cash registers. It had a bell that rang loudly every time a transaction occurred, and it locked the cash away in a drawer that recorded every opening.
It changed the physics of the transaction. Stealing went from being effortless and invisible to being loud, difficult, and highly trackable.
And his store instantly went from hemorrhaging money to turning a healthy profit. He didn't cure human greed, he just built a barrier around it. He realized the system design was so incredibly powerful that he actually closed his store to focus entirely on selling cash registers.
That's wild. So you don't fight human nature with willpower, you fight it with architecture.
Which brings us to the most powerful architectural tool in Munger's entire mental lattice work. If psychology highlights how our brains naturally fail, there is a specific mathematical concept designed to harness that exact pessimism for our benefit. It is called inversion.
Invert, always invert. Munger borrowed this from the 19th century German mathematician Carl Gustav Jacobi, right?
That's right. Jacobi realized that many complex algebraic problems couldn't be solved by moving forward. You had to assume the opposite of what you were trying to prove and work backward toward a contradiction.
So translated into daily life, inversion means instead of asking how to achieve massive success, you ask how to guarantee spectacular, devastating failure. And then your entire strategy becomes systematically avoiding those failure states.
It sounds incredibly counterintuitive, almost depressing. But human beings are remarkably gifted at identifying risks and flaws. We are natural pessimists. Look at the software engineering example from the sources. Say your team is launching a massive new feature. The standard, optimistic approach is to ask, how do we make this rollout a huge success?
And the flaw there is that optimism creates severe blind spots.
Exactly. Success is a vague concept, and focusing on it causes teams to overlook fundamental vulnerabilities. So, you invert the premise. You ask the team, what would make this rollout an absolute, undeniable disaster?
Suddenly, the brainstorming becomes highly specific and actionable.
Right. A disaster means we suffer a massive memory leak. A disaster means customers can't opt out. A disaster means we accidentally delete user data.
It's like playing a video game completely backwards. Instead of running forward blindly, looking for the treasure and hoping you don't step on a landmine, you start at the end. You map out where every single trap, pitfall, and enemy is located. Once you have a map of the traps, finding the treasure is just a matter of walking around them.
And it works for the most mundane tasks, too. Keeping a house clean feels overwhelming if you ask, how do I make this place spotless?
So you invert it. What makes a house disgusting?
Dirty dishes rotting in the sink, overflowing trash bins, laundry covering the floor. The solution isn't a complex cleaning schedule, it's just a strict rule to avoid the failure states. No dishes left in the sink. Empty the trash when it's full, put clothes in the hamper. By aggressively preventing the failure states, you default into the success state.
It's the ultimate defense against death by optimism. So if we take this inverted bias-aware thinking and apply it to the broader world, like navigating a career path or investing capital, how do we map the territory? Because Munger suggests we stop looking at human markets as financial spreadsheets and start looking at them as biological ecosystems.
Well, microeconomics closely mirrors biological evolution. Entities compete for limited resources, adapt to changing environments, and attempt to find highly specialized niches where they can survive.
Okay, that makes sense.
And just like in nature, extreme scale provides massive predatory advantages, but it also carries hidden, fatal disadvantages. The sources contrast the rise of Walmart with the collapse of Sears to prove this point.
Sam Walton started Walmart in tiny Bentonville, Arkansas. He was going up against Sears Roebuck, which was the absolute titan of global retail at the time.
Walton played the ecosystem perfectly. He didn't invent a revolutionary new product. He copied every smart operational tactic his competitors used, and he executed them with ruthless fanaticism. He leveraged the massive advantages of scale, immense purchasing power that lowered costs, and highly efficient computerized distribution systems.
Right.
He aggressively targeted small-town merchants first, finding a niche where those merchants simply couldn't defend against his low prices and high efficiency.
But wait, Sears already possessed massive scale. They had all the money, all the real estate, and all the brand recognition. Why didn't they just crush Walmart in its infancy?
Because Sears fell victim to the fatal disease of scale bureaucracy. In biology, an organism that grows too large without the right internal structure collapses under its own weight. For Sears, that weight was unnecessary layers of middle management.
So the internal incentives shifted completely.
Exactly. A manager at Sears was no longer rewarded for serving the customer. They were rewarded for protecting their department's budget, passing paperwork up the chain, and avoiding blame. The company became big, slow, and dumb. Walmart surfed the wave of retail evolution by staying lean and adaptable, while Sears drowned in its own bureaucratic inertia.
Understanding how these ecosystems operate is vital, but when it comes to the actual mechanics of making a move, deploying your capital in the stock market, or making a major career leap, Munger relies on a different model entirely. He maps the stock market perfectly to the pari-mutuel betting system at the racetrack.
The pari-mutuel system is essential for understanding why picking a good company isn't the same as making a good investment. In a pari-mutuel market, everybody bets into a single pool, and the odds shift dynamically based on where the money flows.
Any fool can look at the paddock and identify the fastest horse with the best jockey and the best track record. That horse becomes the overwhelming favorite.
But because everyone knows it's the best horse, everyone bets on it. The odds change to reflect that consensus. If you bet on the favorite and it wins, you might only get a 3-2 return on your money. The reward is tiny because the risk is perceived to be tiny.
And exactly the same mechanism drives the stock market. You might identify an incredible world-class company like Apple, but millions of other investors have also identified it. The stock price is already driven so high that all of that future greatness is fully priced in.
But the pari-mutuel system has another mathematical hurdle, the house handle. The racetrack takes roughly 17% the total betting pool right off the top before paying out the winners.
So even if you win, the friction of the system eats a massive chunk of your capital. In the stock market, that house handle is transaction costs, management fees, the bid-ask spread, and taxes. To actually generate wealth, you don't just have to pick a winning horse. You have to outsmart the rest of the betting public by a margin large enough to cover that heavy friction cost.
Which sounds impossible, right?
Yeah. How is that mathematically possible?
The individuals who consistently beat the pari-mutuel system employ a strategy that is staggering in its simplicity. They bet very, very seldom.
So the goal isn't to be a day trader, making 100 tiny, hyper-smart decisions every single day to edge out the competition.
No, that is a fool's errand. Munger argues that trying to know everything about everything all the time is total insanity. The winners at the track and the winners in long-term investing will watch thousands of races and do absolutely nothing. They sit on their hands.
They just wait.
They wait for a near-cinch mispriced bet. They wait for a moment where the crowd has severely underestimated a horse, making the odds overwhelmingly favorable. And when that rare opportunity presents itself, they load up heavily. Extreme patience, followed by extreme decisiveness.
But how do you objectively know when you are looking at a mispriced bet rather than just tricking yourself?
By strictly confining yourself to what Munger calls your circle of competence, you have to define exactly where you possess a genuine edge based on your unique aptitudes, training, and experience. If you play games where other people have the natural aptitude and you don't, you will lose.
That makes perfect sense.
The sources use a great folksy example. It is much better to strive to be the absolute best plumbing contractor in Bemidji, Minnesota, a goal that is highly attainable with focus and hard work, than to attempt to win the World Chess Tournament if you don't possess the genetic aptitude for advanced spatial memory.
Right.
It doesn't matter how large your circle of competence is. What matters is knowing exactly where the perimeter lies and refusing to step outside of it.
Know your edge and wait patiently for the fat pitch to cross right through the absolute center of your strike zone. If we pull all of these threads together, the formula for navigating your life and your investments becomes incredibly clear. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room.
You just need to build a multidisciplinary lattice work so you aren't walking around with a single hammer. You need to use physical checklists to bypass the emotional dopamine hits of the cocaine brain.
You have to run a two-track analysis, constantly scanning your environment for hidden incentives and evolutionary biases that are subtly pulling you off course.
You use inversion to map out spectacular failure and systematically avoid those traps. And you ruthlessly protect your circle of competence while waiting for the rare, undeniable opportunities.
It all cycles back to that opening premise. It isn't about being brilliantly right. It is about systemizing your life so that you are consistently not stupid. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative concept from the sources that we haven't fully explored. Munger calls it the Lollapalooza effect.
The Lollapalooza effect occurs when 3, 4, or 5 of these different psychological biases and incentives all converge at the exact same time, pushing a human being in the exact same direction.
Wow.
When that happens, the result isn't just a slight change in behavior, it creates an exponential, overwhelming force. It can lead to incredible achievements or devastating cult-like disasters.
So look closely at your own life today. Think about your workplace, your relationships, or your financial habits. Where might a Lollapalooza be quietly operating right now? Where are multiple incentives, reciprocations, and social proofs converging to drive you toward a goal that you didn't even consciously choose? Find it, invert it, and ask yourself, is this keeping me consistently not stupid?